2024 has been a tough year for the gaming industry. Between failed live service games, more buggy and underwhelming open world games, depressing rounds of layoffs, and weak or slow lineups from various big publishers, things were looking bleak. But then, on the very same day Sony pulled the plug on the disastrous Concord launch, they also plugged in Astro Bot, who swooped in on a rocket-powered DualSense controller to save the day. This beautiful, innovative, joyful, and exciting game feels like a medicinal shot in the arm for a struggling industry. Astro Bot combines the best elements of more classic platformers with a wonderful and modern coat of physics-driven paint, delivering arguably the best game of the year so far. So let's examine the nuances of why this game is so successful and why it should be a blueprint for so many new games going forward. As a quick side note, this is my first new video since I hit 1,000 subscribers on the same day Astro Bot launched, so I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to all of you who supported the channel as it grew. If you haven't already, please subscribe and check out the always expanding library of retro and modern gaming analysis content. Now, when I first booted up Astro Bot, I was almost overwhelmed by how different this game feels from almost everything else on the PS5. In fact, I think this game is defined as much by what it does not do as it is by all the things it does wonderfully accomplish. There are no extensive walking and talking tutorials for 2 hours until you can start the real game. There's no sad dads or endless palettes of gray and brown. The console horsepower isn't used to render photorealistic but static landscapes. There aren't endless settings menus where you decide which graphical features to sacrifice. There are no microtransactions or prompts to buy the rest of the game. There's no weird window prompt to log in with a separate publisher user account and accept 50 pages of terms of service. No forced multiplayer or live service features. This is a single player experience. And in case you're wondering, no, there aren't any terrible stealth segments like other games that were recently released. Perhaps my personal favorite though, this game isn't designed to just supply endless kitchen sink content until you get bored. It's an intentionally crafted experience designed to be enjoyed, completed, and to some extent leave you wanting more. This used to be the way top-tier first-party games were designed, yet somehow it almost feels novel today, like a concept reserved for smaller titles or indie games. The developers even commented that they wanted 12 to 15 hours of consistent fun instead of 50 hours of intermittent boredom, and they accomplished that mission in spades. I could go on, but you get the point. Astro Bot rejects every overused trend in modern gaming to deliver a refreshing and memorable experience. This game evokes pure joy during the entire experience in so many ways. It's a feeling that's been missing from Sony's platform for many years, ever since they doubled down on darker, third-person cinematic games and online multiplayer. In the PS2 and even PS3 eras, Sony published an incredibly varied library of games, including lighthearted and colorful platformers, arcade racing games, fun action games, and so much more. It's ironic that Astro Bot features so many references to the PlayStation brands, yet that brand now looks almost unrecognizable in comparison. During the game, you rescue 300 other bots after your PS5 mothership is attacked. I hope Sony rescues some of those franchises for real and brings back more AA-sized franchises with color, joy, and variety. In many ways, this game feels like what you might expect from a top-tier Nintendo platformer. In fact, the overall design of Astro Bot is almost shockingly close to the Mario Galaxy 3 that never was, but it brings so many of its own talents and ideas along the way to establish its own identity. Astro Bot is a natural evolution of classic platformers like the 3D Mario games, Spyro, Crash, and so on. It takes a lot of the same structure and elements of those games and wraps them in all kinds of interesting and dynamic systems that would only be possible on modern hardware. I talk about this a lot on my channel. Older games are often more simplistic visually and in terms of gameplay systems, but those systems are the perfected focus and used in interesting and interactive ways. For example, I mentioned Astro Bot has almost the exact same structure as Mario Galaxy. You fly on a PS5 controller ship between solar systems to visit planets and rescue bots, instead of collecting stars. Like Galaxy, each solar system has several large core worlds, and then smaller points of interest with isolated puzzles. You also use the special controller features for enhanced interactivity with each of these worlds, which are comprised of a series of challenge segments with checkpoints. Each core planet usually has about 8 bots to save, which sort of reminds me of the Spyro games actually, where you're trying to rescue a handful of dragons on each level. This feels very old school Sony, and it encourages you to really explore the levels and not rush. Astro also shares similarities with Mario Odyssey, where many of the core worlds have some sort of power-up or gadget that part or all of the level is built around. In Mario Odyssey, you steal abilities from other creatures using your hat. In Astro, you usually unlock gadgets from treasure chests, which either transform Astro or give him a companion on his back with some ability. Obviously, many platformers share these types of power-up elements, but the point is that Astro Bot supercharges these traditional elements in interesting new ways that are only possible on modern hardware. This is a really exciting concept. I love games that prove more advanced technology and hardware can and should matter significantly for gameplay. Faster processing shouldn't be limited to just pumping out larger environments with better lighting, for example. They say that the more advanced technology is, the more it appears as simple magic, and Astro Bot demonstrates this idea in a lot of ways. Everywhere you look in this game, there are fluid and physics simulations and dynamic interactivity points. Cloth and water and glass and highly interactive piles of objects are everywhere and often in great quantities. Levels transform and warp and change rapidly in unexpected and significant ways. This game just feels so much more alive than almost everything else on the system. Astro Bot is an animation and physics dream. Things are constantly exploding, squashing, stretching, tumbling, sliding, breaking, sponging. It's really something to behold. I've never played a platform that felt this dynamic in so many ways while still maintaining beautiful and crisp visuals. There's also all kinds of deformation, whether it's matting down snow, sand changing to mud, sticky tar dissolving in water. The materials and surface interactivity is just amazing. One of my favorite levels in the game takes place in a beautiful oriental bathhouse, complete with bamboo shoots and dynamic pools of water. This level essentially turns Astro Bot into a giant sponge. He can absorb water to grow larger and then squeeze the water out over objects and areas of the level. While you're giant, you can also stomp around and destroy objects using the glorious physics system. There are actually a few different worlds with different takes on shrinking and growing. Before you can say Minish Cap, you're the size of a leaf and running into tiny tree tunnels. I constantly experienced moments where it felt like so much work must have gone into that one tiny segment, and then the game immediately delivers another with impeccable pacing. There's also numerous boss fights that often double as epic set pieces with incredible animation across huge environments. Now, when I originally played Astro's Playroom at the launch of the PS5, I certainly enjoyed that game like everyone else, but I was a bit worried the DualSense features would end up feeling like gimmicks shoehorned into every game. In reality, we actually ended up with the reverse of that. Almost no games meaningfully leverage these features, and the ones that do use them very minimally. The full Astro Bot is here though, and it quickly tempered those fears within the first hour. Although the DualSense controller does play a big role, Team Asobi handles the controller integration effectively through a less is more approach. DualSense features like gyro and haptic triggers are used subtly during core gameplay, but then placed front and center for shorter side minigames. For example, there are some interesting minigames in between worlds where you repair parts of the PS5 using all the different features of the controller. Or sometimes you'll enter a portal in a level to start a minigame that uses specific controller features in more dramatic ways, such as tilting using the gyro. This also reminded me of Mario Galaxy, where the core gameplay movement is left more traditional, but elements of the controller are used to enhance interactivity in interesting ways or key moments. Thankfully, Team Asobi also gives you the option to disable some of this functionality if you really don't like it. At first I thought I'd use this and disable some of these features since I usually don't like controller gimmicks on any platform really, but I ended up enjoying the way they implemented these features so much that I never turned it off. This option is one of many smart but subtle quality of life features like this in the game. As another example, there aren't really any tutorials or explanations of how the game plays or works. Astro Bot naturally gives you visual cues of what you should be doing or where to go. New power-ups or key interactivity points are either self-explanatory or display a small animation in the corner of the screen to give an example of the intended action. So a power-up that slows down time has a visual indicator on the power-up itself that shows how long is left until it deactivates, and so on. Astro Bot is just very good at keeping you in control and keeping you playing. Now, as much as I love this game, Astro Bot does have a few minor quirks that started to wear on me a bit. One of my pet peeves is when a game doesn't allow you to adjust the camera rotation speed. Since I think most games set the default motion way too slow, Astro Bot's camera isn't super slow, but it is just slow enough to notice, and there isn't an option to make it faster. Astro also dies from a single hit during normal gameplay, which can grow irritating in some segments that just throw a lot of enemies and hazards at you at once. There are usually very generous checkpoints and unlimited lives, so the frustration never gets too bad, but there are also segments that can test your patience, particularly some of the smaller challenge worlds. Astro also commits one of the most trivial but also one of the worst gameplay crimes out there, which is forcing you to blow into the controller microphone to simulate wind. I think it's so bizarre that developers are still doing this. It was arguably normalized by the Nintendo DS 20 years ago, but it's not fun and should just not exist as a gameplay interaction, but I digress. Luckily, this gimmick is used very infrequently, although that just further makes me wonder why it's even in there. Moving on. So I hope Astro Bot sales reach a level of success that shows Sony gamers want more of this type of experience. Perhaps Sony can use this as a lesson to resurrect some of the dead franchises highlighted in Astro Bot and give them another shot in the real world beyond a cameo. Even if Sony doesn't bring back lost franchises, I hope we see more games like Astro Bot, and ideally a sequel. Experiences that prioritize gameplay, fun, and innovation instead of just increasingly large and unpolished worlds filled with endless volumes of generic, lifeless content. Astro Bot is the only game I can remember since Tears of the Kingdom that caused me to smile due to a surprising or exciting gameplay scenario I had never seen before, and that's something the industry just desperately needs more of. So what are your thoughts? Do you think Astro Bot is one of the greatest games of the year? What do you like or dislike about it? How do you think Astro Bot impacts or compares to the wider industry? Leave a comment and let's discuss. Thanks for watching.